A Formula One champion just disappeared. Hours before the Japanese Grand Prix. No cameras. No announcements. No explanation. And then suddenly, he shows up in a completely different car. Not a Red Bull. A Nissan. One of the fastest, most aggressive machines outside Formula One. In the rain. On a live track. Pushing lap after lap like it actually mattered. This was not a show run. This was not a publicity stunt. Because what Max Verstappen did inside that car is already making people inside the paddock ask one uncomfortable question. What does he know that nobody else does? And more importantly, why now, right before a race where his entire season could collapse? Stay with me, because the real reason behind this changes everything. Subscribe to the channel, because you are about to see what nobody else is explaining. Max Verstappen did not go to Fuji by accident. That is the first thing you need to understand. Because while the rest of the grid was already mentally inside Suzuka, he was somewhere else entirely. Different track, different car, different challenge. And that alone breaks the normal routine of a Formula One driver. But here is where it starts to feel different. This was not announced in advance. No build-up, no media push. It just happened. One moment, nothing. The next, people at Fuji Speedway are watching a four-time world champion step into a Super GT car like it is the most normal thing in the world. And if you think that is just a cool side story, this is where most people get it wrong. Because drivers do not randomly change environments before a race weekend. Especially not someone like Verstappen. Every hour before a Grand Prix is calculated. Sleep, simulator work, engineering meetings. Everything is optimized. So when that pattern breaks, even slightly, there is always a reason. And here is the detail that makes this even more interesting. The car he chose was not simple. The Nissan Z GT500 is one of the most demanding machines you can drive. It is not forgiving. It does not adapt to you. You adapt to it. And yet, Verstappen went straight into it. In the rain. Low grip. Unstable conditions. The exact scenario where mistakes happen. Where even experienced drivers struggle to find confidence. But instead of easing into it, he pushed. Which raises a question that nobody inside Formula One wants to answer yet. Was this really about promotion? Or was this about something else entirely? Because when a driver like Verstappen puts himself in a situation like this, right before one of the most important race weekends of the season, it is not curiosity. It is intention. And that intention starts to connect with something much bigger. Something happening inside Red Bull that very few people are openly talking about. Because if everything was under control, if the car was dominant, if the confidence was still there would be no reason to look anywhere else. But Verstappen did. And that changes the meaning of everything you just saw. And this is where the story takes a turn that most fans are not seeing yet. Because what happened at Fuji is not just about a car. It is about timing. And timing, in Formula One, is everything. Right now, Verstappen is not leading the championship. He is not controlling the narrative. He is reacting. And for a driver who built his dominance on control, that is a dangerous position to be in. But here is where things get even more revealing. Just days before this Nissan run, he was already doing something unusual. He went to the Nürburgring. Not for testing. For racing. Wheel to wheel. High risk. No guarantees. And for a moment, he won. On pure performance. On instinct. On raw driving ability. But then it was taken away. A disqualification. A technical issue. Something completely outside of his control. And that detail matters more than it seems. Because now you have a pattern. Two completely different events. Two different cars. Two different environments. Same outcome. Speed, without reward. Performance, without result. And if you connect that back to Formula One, it starts to look very familiar. Because that is exactly what is happening with Red Bull right now. The pace is there in moments. The talent is undeniable. But the results are not following. And that creates something very dangerous inside a driver's mind. Doubt. Not in himself, but in the system around him. And when that doubt appears, drivers start searching for something else. Not necessarily a new team. Not yet. But a new feeling. A reminder of control. A reminder that they can still dominate something. And this is where the Nissan becomes more than just a car. It becomes proof. Proof that outside Formula One, Verstappen is still untouchable. That no matter the machine, no matter the conditions, he can adapt faster than anyone else. But that creates an uncomfortable contrast. Because if he can do that everywhere else, then why is Formula One suddenly different? Why is he struggling there, but not here? And this is the exact question that is starting to circulate quietly inside the paddock. Not publicly. Not yet. But it is there. Because drivers notice these things. Engineers notice these things. And teams, they definitely notice these things. Because a driver who proves he can win in anything is a driver who does not need to wait forever. And that is where this story becomes bigger than Japan. Bigger than Suzuka. Even bigger than this season. Because what happened at Fuji might not be about preparation. It might be about realization. A moment where Verstappen understands something very simple. Something very dangerous. That his limits are not defined by Formula One. And if that idea continues to grow, then the next move he makes will not be small. Because what Verstappen may have realized in that moment is something most drivers never allow themselves to think about. Not publicly. Not openly. But once it enters your mind, it never really leaves. And it starts with a simple comparison. At Fuji, everything was new. New car. New system. New behavior. No expectations. No pressure to deliver a result that defines a championship. Just driving. Pure, instinctive driving. And in those conditions, he looked free. That is the word people at the circuit kept coming back to. Free. No tension. No visible frustration. Just a driver extracting everything from a machine that responds to him. And now compare that to Formula One, where every lap is analyzed. Every mistake amplified. Every limitation exposed. And suddenly, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Because this is not just about performance anymore. It is about feeling. And elite drivers, the ones at the very top, they do not just chase speed. They chase connection. That moment where the car does exactly what they expect. Without hesitation. Without compromise. And here is where things become even more uncomfortable for Red Bull. Because if Verstappen is starting to feel that connection somewhere else, even temporarily, then Formula One risks becoming the place where that feeling is missing. And once that happens, motivation changes. Focus shifts. Priorities evolve. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But slowly. Quietly. Until one day, the decision no longer feels difficult. But here is the detail that almost nobody is talking about yet. This was all happening just before Suzuka. A circuit where Verstappen has been nearly untouchable. For consecutive victories. Total control. Complete dominance. And now, he arrives in a completely different situation. Not as the favorite. Not with the fastest car. But with something else in his mind. A reference point. A comparison. Because after Fuji, he knows exactly what it feels like to drive a car that responds differently. And that changes how you approach everything. Corner entry. Throttle application. Confidence under pressure. Even risk. Especially risk. Because if you no longer trust the machine beneath you completely, you hesitate. Just slightly. But in Formula One, slightly is everything. And this is where the story quietly builds towards something much bigger. Because if Suzuka does not go his way, if the gap to the front remains, if the frustration continues to grow, then Fuji will not just be a memory. It will be a reference. A moment he can return to mentally. A reminder that outside this environment, he is still in control. And that is where the real shift begins. Not when a driver leaves a team, but when he realizes, he does not have to stay confined to one world to prove who he is. Because once that idea becomes real, every option opens. Every possibility becomes valid. And the next move is no longer about loyalty. It is about freedom. And what nobody is ready to say yet is that Fuji may have been the first real step in that direction. And now we reach the part that makes this entire story impossible to ignore. Because everything so far, the Nissan, the Nürburgring, the timing, all of it leads to one uncomfortable possibility. What if this is not experimentation? What if this is preparation? Not for this weekend. Not even for this season. Something bigger. Because drivers at this level do not explore other categories just for fun. Not like this. Not with this intensity. Not with this consistency. They do it when something inside their current world starts to feel limited. And that is exactly where Verstappen finds himself right now. A car that is no longer dominant. A team that is under pressure. A championship that is slipping away before it even fully begins. And at the same time, other teams are rising. Mercedes is no longer chasing. They are leading. Winning races. Setting the pace. And that changes everything. Because for the first time in years, Verstappen is not the reference point anymore. He is the one trying to catch up. And for a driver built on absolute control, that is not just frustrating. It is destabilizing. But here is where the story goes even deeper. Because when a driver like Verstappen starts to feel that shift, he does not panic. He recalibrates. He starts gathering information, testing limits, understanding where he truly stands, not just in Formula One, but as a driver, across everything. And that is exactly what Fuji represents. A test. Not officially. Not publicly. But internally. A question he is asking himself. If I step outside this world, am I still the best? And based on what people saw that day, the answer was immediate. Yes. And that answer is more powerful than any result in Formula One right now. Because it removes doubt. It reinforces identity. It gives him something Red Bull currently cannot guarantee. Certainty. And once a driver regains that certainty, everything changes. Negotiations change. Decisions change. Even patience changes. Because now, staying is no longer the only path. And this is where the tension quietly reaches its peak. Suzuka is next. A track that demands precision. Confidence. Total commitment. There is no room for hesitation there. None. And Verstappen arrives with two completely different realities in his mind. One where he felt absolute control, in the Nissan. And one where control is no longer guaranteed, in the Red Bull. So when he puts the helmet on? When he goes into the first corner at Suzuka? There is something new inside that equation. Comparison. And comparison, at this level, is dangerous. Because if the Red Bull does not respond, if the balance is not there, if the performance gap is still visible, then the question will no longer be hidden. It will be unavoidable. Why am I limiting myself to this? And once that question becomes real, the future stops being predictable. Because Formula One is no longer the only stage where Verstappen can prove who he is. Fuji showed that. Clearly. And now, everything builds toward what happens next. Not just in the race, but in his mind. Because the most important decision is not made on track. It is made after. When the noise fades. When the data is reviewed. When the feeling remains. And if that feeling tells him that something is missing, then what we saw in Japan was not a random moment. It was the beginning of a shift that could change everything.